Today is Trivia Tuesday, but we're so packed on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast today that Trivia Tuesday this week will actually be moved to Wednesday, a Wednesday version of Trivia Tuesday this week. Now, what are we so packed with today? Well, we're going to hear from Cabbie, the legendary Cabbie, on how he thinks the rest of the 2023 season is going to play out for the Toronto Blue Jays. We're going to get into my choice for the next member of the Level of Excellence. Plus, we have a Philadelphia Phillies series to get ready for, and we want to deep dive the really good pitching matchup happening tonight as Yusei Kikuchi taking on Zack Wheeler. Let's do this.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. Craig Ballard, Locked On Blue Jays. Yes, indeed. First season hosting the Locked On Blue Jay podcast. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, of course, your team every day. And the Locked On Blue Jay podcast been around for a long time, but this is my first year hosting it. Very proud to be hosting it, having an absolute blast. Toronto Blue Jay baseball, a big deal for me. So I absolutely thank and appreciate that you're taking time of your part of your day to tune in and talk Toronto Blue Jay baseball with me. I want to remind you, of course, all the Blue Jay action this season is available on SiriusXM. And if you're taking in today's episode on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast YouTube page, thank you for that. Please hit that like, leave that comment, hit that subscribe, please, and thank you. And I want to shout out Sean Broom. I hope it's Broome. I hope it's Broom, Sean, but I see you hit that subscribe. Thank you for that. And to Lionheart70, who let me know he is now subscriber number 648 to the page. Again, the Locked On Blue Jay podcast existed before I got here, right? Ben Shulman was the previous host. We know Ben Shulman off doing some huge things right now. A shout out to Ben Shulman and his dad, Dan Shulman. So good, both of them, right? So good. But when I took over at the beginning of the year, I believe it was, I want to say 226. It was something like, it was 200 and it was in the mid 200s, I'd say, somewhere around that, of subscribers already on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast YouTube page. So Lionheart70 letting me know we're now up to 648, thanks to him hitting that subscribe. The him or her, I think I've interacted with them before. I think it is a him, but the him or her, Lionheart70, hitting that subscribe. Thank you so much for that. To the everydayers, I want to shout out someone like Clark Monroe, who I know is making the Locked On Blue Jay podcast his first podcast listen every day. And a lot of you are making the Locked On Blue Jay podcast your first podcast listen every day. The numbers on the listens, Spotify, Apple, however you take in your podcast, the podcast number, like the audio numbers, are increasing, even better than what we're seeing on the YouTube page. So just can't thank you enough for that. Helping the Locked On Blue Jay podcast grow means a lot to me. Now, let's start today with a few follow-ups, as yesterday we closed with a look at who may be next for the Toronto Blue Jays Level of Excellence, and today I'm going to get into who my choice is for that. Plus, on Thursday's episode last week, it was the whole thing, the Throwback Thursday, the whole thing was dedicated to Jose Bautista, and we had Cabbie, and the legendary Cabbie, in the house for that. And now, today, want to play a clip that hasn't been aired yet, because again, the Thursday was all about Jose Bautista, but I did ask Cabbie how he sees the rest of 2023 playing out for the Toronto Blue Jays. So we'll watch that clip, get his take and his thoughts on that also. Now, first, of course, yesterday, is at the end, we deep dive the two candidates that I hear mentioned the most to be the next people added to the Level of Excellence. That's Tom Henke, that's Jimmy Key. And for Henke, the resume to be added to the Level of Excellence, oh boy, it is extremely strong. But I lamented his lack of a signature moment, and we looked at how he blew his chance for that signature moment in Game 6 of the 1992 World Series. Then we looked at Jimmy Key. Jimmy Key has an impressive application for the Level of Excellence as well, but I lamented that as good as Key was in his 9 seasons with the Toronto Blue Jays, his first 2 seasons after leaving the Blue Jays, 1993 and 1994, both with the New York Yankees, both were all-star seasons for Jimmy Key. Both earned him MVP votes. He had never had MVP votes before, and both of those seasons he finished in the top 4 for Cy Young voting. If Jimmy Key could have had even similar performances, he went 35-10 over those 2 seasons, and remember, 94 is the strike shortened season, so it could have been even better than 35-10. But if Jimmy Key had been able to do anything even close to resembling that in 93 and 94 for the Blue Jays, now we've got a 10th and 11th season. We're into double-digit seasons, and that level of epicness that already existed for Jimmy Key, plus how good he would have been in 93 and 94. If that had been the case, then I would submit to you that Jimmy Key would already be in the Level of Excellence for the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, neither of those Blue Jay legends get my vote as the next level of excellence addition, though. And I'm certainly not going to be upset if either one of them is the next to go in. They're both deserving, but for me, Tom Cheek is massively deserving of being in the level of excellence, and he was added several years ago. Well, how about his broadcast partner, Jerry Howarth? How is Jerry Howarth not in the level of excellence? If you're like me, then you're a believer that greatness is measured over time. Well, Jerry Howarth was as good as it gets on a radio call from 1991 to 2017. Are you kidding me right now? It's almost 50 years, 50. That's almost 50 years of calling Toronto Blue Jay baseball. Watching I loved growing up. I would watch the telecast. I'd watch the game, but the TV's on mute while I'm listening to Tom and Jerry call the game. And Tom and Jerry usually had, but that 7-second delay didn't matter. It was still so much better to listen to how good they were painting the picture, calling the game on the radio. How about, I know hard to believe for our American friends or our friends outside of Canada, but the summer months in Canada are awesome. I know it's hard to believe, and the whole igloo perception, right? The whole always horrible weather in Canada perception, right? No, the summers are glorious. That's baseball time, of course. And I used to love in being outside, enjoying the nice Canadian summer weather with the radio on as I listened to Tom Cheek and Jerry Howarth describe Toronto Blue Jay baseball for me. Loved it. And again, how long did that? I mean, that was almost 50 years of well over 40 years of that. In my opinion, absolutely epic. Jerry Howarth called all the Blue Jay playoff teams. Jerry Howarth called up until last year, I should say. But what really impresses me is Jerry Howarth called all those stinkers as well, those brutal Toronto Blue Jay baseball teams, those 4th and 5th place Toronto baseball teams year after year after year, even during the seasons where the Blue Jays were really good. How about all the stinker games that Jerry Howarth had to find ways to entertain and walk us through and talk us through and to entertain us for those without the pitch clock, right? In those days, 3 to 4 hours of baseball action. Jerry Howarth. With the internet, now around, and as the internet was getting more and more prevalent, I started to be able to listen to other radio broadcast teams from across MLB, and all that did, and I was already huge on Tom and Jerry are the best in the business. I was already huge on that. All the internet has done is provided more and more, in my opinion, proof, I would say evidence that Tom Cheek and Jerry Howarth were as good as it gets calling games. You hear these other announcers around the league, all due respect to them, absolutely not as good as Tom Cheek, absolutely not as good as Jerry Howarth. Jerry Howarth, 77 years young, and he had to step away from the broadcasting career because of prostate cancer, but come on, 77 years young. Let's make sure we get Jerry Howarth the flowers that he massively has earned, that he massively deserves, before it's too late. I don't want to throw a morbid, aspect into this here, but 77, let's give Jerry Howarth his flowers while he's here with us. Now, let's hear from the legend, Cabbie, Cabral Richards, Cabbie on the street, and about how he fancies the rest of 2023 going for the Toronto Blue Jays. Does he see them as a legitimate World Series contender? I asked Cabbie that very question. Here's what he had to say. I always like asking my guests, if I were to say to you, Cabbie, that I've actually come back from the future, and I can actually tell you that the Blue Jays win the World Series in 2023, what's your instinct on that? What's your initial reaction? Well, Craig, if that's the case, then X must have gone really well for this team down the stretch. What's that X for you?
Did Yordan Alvarez get injured? Did Freddie Freeman get injured? Did Mookie Betts get injured?
So the 2023 Blue Jays need some outside help.
Did Ronald Acuna Jr. or Matt Olson or Austin Riley, did they all get the flu and they're sidelined for 7 or 8 days? Michael Harris is in it.
Harris is doing his thing. He's doing his thing. He's doing his thing.
But he's not Matt Olson, Austin Riley, not Ronald Acuna Jr. It would be very surprising. The Jays have a solid team, and we're getting production from Whit Merrifield is all of a sudden this 300 hitter or whatever. He's maybe not 300, but he's been playing amazing. And we're getting timely hits from Chapman, and Bo Bichette is leading the AL and in batting average. And I would be surprised pleasantly, but I would be surprised. I think Houston is still the team to beat in the AL, and in the NL, it's either right now as we speak. Who knows what? Obviously, nobody can predict the future, but the Dodgers and the Braves, I think, are head and shoulders above the rest of the NL. Like those teams are just so ridiculously stacked.
Now, coming up on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, we'll get set for this mini 2-game series with the Philadelphia Phillies in town. Both games, of course, available on SiriusXM. Now, first, I wanted to mention that, you're finally taking that summer vacation you've been planning and looking forward to, but you are dreading buying all the necessities before you take off. Well, it's time to stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything in return. Enter Ibotta. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. You either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and you get the cash back. Yes, it is that easy. The average Ibotta user earns $120 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. You could use a cash back, for that flight, for that game you want to go to, fancy dinner, etc., right? Etc. Other apps give you points back, yeah, but they don't amount to much. Now with Ibotta, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, to your PayPal, or gift cards. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta. That includes Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta, and you use the code MLB when you register. So just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app. Use the code MLB. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code MLB. Toronto Blue Jays, despite being swept in the mini 2-game series earlier this season at Philadelphia, still hold quite an impressive 46-32 record advantage over the Phillies over the years. Yes, that does include the 4-2 in the 93 World Series. Yes, indeed. Phillies come into this series at a 65-54 record, leading the NL wild card 17-13 since the All-Star break. Now, the last time that the Philadelphia Phillies won a series in Toronto, you've got to go all the way back to 2011, and the Blue Jays 11-3 versus the Phillies in the 6 since 2011. I believe it was 2009. They didn't play in Toronto in 2010 and 2011. So in 2009 and 2011, both of those seasons, actually, the Phillies came to town for a 3-game series, won the 3 games, took 2 out of 3 each time. But since then, in the 6, 2021 and 2020, the Blue Jays, home games were not at the Rogers Center against the Phillies. So you take those games out, and the Jays still very impressive. They've won 11 of the last 14 games between these two teams in Toronto. Now, the Blue Jays were on absolute fire versus the Phillies coming into the final game of last season. This season, you see the Jays played a 2-gamer at Philly and then a 2-gamer at home against Philly. Same thing last season. It was the same setup last season. And going into that final game, it was at Philly, the 4th and final game of that of their series last season. The Blue Jays had won 25 of the previous 35 games versus these two. They were on absolute fire versus the Phillies, and were leading that game. If you take your mind's eye back to last season, that final Blue Jays-Phillies tilt was 3-0 Blue Jays in the 8th. They would lose 4-3 in 10 innings as the Phillies would rally off of the Blue Jay bullpen, Jimmy Garcia, Jordan Romano, and then in extra innings, they would get to Adam Simber. That turned things around for the Phillies in this matchup. They won both games this season, so they've now won 3 straight against the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, the 2-game sweep that happened earlier this season for the Phillies over the Blue Jays, you might remember that was Aaron Nola in Game 1. That was Zack Wheeler in Game 2. Well, this series, we see Zack Wheeler in Game 1, Aaron Nola in Game 2. So the same 2 absolute stud pitchers, top of the rotation pitchers that the Phillies offer. Blue Jays faced them both a couple weeks ago. They'll face them both in this series. Different order of the games they face them, but still work cut out for the Toronto Blue Jays here in this series, no doubt about it. When you look at Wheeler and Nola in those 2 games versus the Blue Jays a couple months back, I guess at this point, they combined for 13 innings pitched, just 3 runs allowed on just 8 hits, just 3 walks in those 13 innings, and 13 strikeouts in those 13 innings. They were very good. Tonight's starter, Zack Wheeler in particular, Nola was very good. Wheeler was outstanding. So, oh boy, definitely something we'll need to keep an eye on tonight. Now, if you take your mind's eye back to that 2-gamer this season, so how, what has 2023 looked like for Phillies and Blue Jays? Well, that Game 1, that was an Alek Manoah start, and the Phillies hit Manoah. They hit every Blue Jay pitcher that day. If you remember that Game 1 of that series, they hit Alek Manoah, they hit Tim Mesa, they hit Nate Pearson, they hit Trevor Richards, they hit Eric Swanson. Nick Castellanos in particular had a very big game. If you remember, he was 3 for 4. He had a double and a home run. We know Castellanos is a slugger. In the seventh inning, it was 5-1 Phillies. And the Phillies hit multiple Blue Jays, including Matt Chapman with the bases loaded. There was an error in there as well. So all of a sudden, 5-1 was 5-4, and the Blue Jays had the bases loaded with one out. But what have we seen from the Toronto Blue Jays? You already, if you don't remember it, you already know where I'm going with this, right? Blue Jays this season hitting .203 with the bases loaded. My goodness. George Springer, who on the season is 1 for 14 with the bases loaded, well, he struck out, and Danny Jansen grounded out. Then in the bottom of the eighth, the Phillies would rally for 3 off of Trevor Richards and Eric Swanson. So 5-4 became 8-4. Philly never looked back. They sweep the 2 games, or sorry, they took game 1 of that series. Sorry, that leads us into game 2. Game 2 was a beauty. Remember, Kevin Gausman was sensational for the Blue Jays. Zack Wheeler, as we were saying earlier, was sensational for the Phillies. Again, Wheeler on the mound tonight. Oh boy. Brandon Belt hit a 5th inning home run in that game to make it 1-0 Blue Jays. It would remain 1-0 all the way to the bottom of the 9th, where the Phillies would rally off of Jordan Romano. They would tie it at 1. If you remember that fantastic play that Vlad made at first base to keep the game at a 1-1 tie, to allow the Blue Jays to still be in the game, and the game would head to the 10th inning. In the 10th inning, Nathan Lucas would be a pinch runner. You know how the extra innings, you get that free runner that starts at second base. Well, that was Nathan Lucas, and as far as I know, I think Nathan Lucas might still be standing on second base in Philadelphia, wondering what the heck happened, because he just stood there. I mean, the Blue Jays had Danny Jansen strike out, the Blue Jays had Santiago Espinal strike out, and then to end the game, Alejandro Kirk on a ground out. Oh boy. Then in the bottom of the 10th, 1st and 2nd, 1 out. There's a sharp comebacker snagged by Tim Meza. He throws to Bo at second at 1st and 2nd, 1 out. Comebacker right to the mound. Nice job by Meza to snag it. Throws to second. Perfect throw to Bo for the first out, right? Need that double play to end the inning. Go to second for 1. Bo's throw over to Vlad at first. Do you remember it? Do you remember that throw? Oh my goodness. One of the wilder throws you're ever going to see in your life, especially with such a good feed on the front end of it. I mean, Meza fed Bo. He had all kinds of time to make this play. Completely rushed. Horrible mechanics on the throw. The throw went sailing way past Vladimir Guerrero Jr. The winning run would score. The Phillies ultimately sweep that little mini 2-gamer from the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, that was an extra inning game. I mean, just as a side note, let's see, because I think this will be, a couple of close games again on Tuesday and Wednesday here. So Blue Jays so far this season, 7-7, just as an FYI, 7-7 in extra inning games. The Phillies were 7-2. They were dominating in extra inning games. They've actually lost their last 2 though, so they're now 7-4 in extra inning games. Now, one thing that's just, I think, remarkable. From the time those 2 teams got together a few months back to now, the Philadelphia Phillies have found themselves. They have caught fire. The Phillies are 49-35 since they got together with the Toronto Blue Jays. 14 games over 500. The Blue Jays are 4 games over 500 in that same span at 44-40. So a tale of 2 wildcard teams right now, yes, but I mean, the Phillies have been so much hotter than overall than the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, this season for the Phillies versus AL East teams, they've dominated Tampa Bay, they've dominated Baltimore, and they've been dominated by the last place teams, the Yankees and the Red Sox. I've got them. My most impressive thing I've seen from the Phillies this season is they went to Tampa Bay and swept the Rays in a 3-game series. How do you get a sweep? I didn't even know that it was possible. I didn't even know that by rule that was even possible, that you could sweep at the Toronto Blue Jays House of Horrors, the Tropicana Field in Tampa Bay. That really stood out to me. Very impressive. The Blue Jays lost. Now, of course, I mean, how have the Jays done against, NL East teams? Well, we know they lost both games to Philly. We know probably the worst game of the season for the Blue Jays in 2023 was that 11-0 loss to NL East team, the Miami Marlins. But in the other 9 games, so there's 0-3 right there, but in the other 9 games that the Blue Jays have played against the NL East this season, the Blue Jays have won all 9 of those games, and that includes a sweep over the New York Mets, and that includes a sweep over, got to be the best team in baseball, the Atlanta Braves. I'm going to predict a split in this series. I mean, how can you look at the Wheeler and Nola going for the Phillies? Okay, Phillies probably sweep this series. Well, wait a minute. What about the other side of the coin? Blue Jays have Yusei Kikuchi and Kevin Gausman going. Are the Blue Jays really going to get swept? Their 2 best pitchers going here. Certainly their 2 hottest pitchers. Are the Blue Jays really going to get swept here? No. So I can't see Wheeler and Nola getting swept. I can't see Yusei and Gausman getting swept. So I'm going to split the difference. I'm going to say that this series ends up 1 each. Next on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, we'll deep dive tonight's really good-looking pitching matchup But first, I wanted to mention that football season about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. And you can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's fanduel.com/lockedon. Let's take a look at the Phillies starter tonight. Very good righty on the mound, Zack Wheeler. Zack Wheeler, 9-5 on the season, 3.74 ERA. In 2021, he finished second in Cy Young voting in the National League. And in 2021, he led the league with 3 complete games and 2 complete game shutouts. Now, he hasn't had either ever since that 2021. So in 2022 and 2023, he's been very good. I mean, he hasn't fallen off a cliff, just hasn't quite been what he was in that 2021 when he was making that run at the Cy Young. For the first time since 2019, his ERA is in the 3s and not the 2s. I mean, Zack Wheeler is really darn good. Now, speaking of an ERA in the 2s, it is in the 2s since the All-Star break. 2.76 ERA in his 5 starts since the break. That game, I keep saying, man, did he ever pitch really well against the Jays, a couple months back? If you remember that game, that was 7 innings pitched. It was 1 run on 3 hits, 1 walk, 7 strikeouts. He was dominant. The Phillies overall are 15-8 in Wheeler starts. I mean, extremely impressive. And 6 of those 8 losses were by 1 run. So pretty much every single time. The other losses, by the way, the other 2 losses, one was by 2 runs, one was by 3 runs. So every single time Zack Wheeler hits the mound for the Philadelphia Phillies, he absolutely gives them a chance to win. This is a scary starter here. The Phillies, in fact, I mean, super hot. They've won 9 of Zack Wheeler's last 11 starts. Now, in this Blue Jay lineup, not a ton of experience versus Zack Wheeler. Brandon Belt, the most experience, and he's had some success. 6 for 20, and 2 of those 6 hits left the ballpark for Brandon Belt versus Zack Wheeler. Now, George Springer just 1 for 5 career versus Wheeler. Whit Merrifield just 1 for 7 career against Wheeler, and Dalton Varsho and Matt Chapman each just 1 for 8 versus Wheeler. That's a combined 4 for 28. So on paper, nothing to look forward to there. Now we know what Merrifield, he's been hitting much better, and Dalton Varsho had himself a bit of a weekend as well. Matt Chapman, let's see what happens with that middle finger. Is he going to play tonight? How is he going to play in this series? How is he going to look? But on paper, this looks really good for Zack Wheeler. Again, have to hope that Whit Merrifield is just hitting so much better recently, and that Dalton Varsho is hitting so much better recently. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. just 2 for 7 in his career versus Zack Wheeler, but the 2 hits were extra bases. There was a double and a home run in there. And would you believe, this is one of the, I'd say, more surprising, pleasantly surprising glass half fulls that we've had this season on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast. We can actually look forward to seeing Paul DeJong today. What, Craig, did you say? Yes. We can actually look forward to seeing Paul DeJong today. He's had 3 singles and 700 at bats so far for the Blue Jays. It's been awful, but in his career versus Zack Wheeler, Paul DeJong 4 for 9, and 2 of those 4 hits left the ballpark. So I'm actually excited about Paul DeJong tonight. Now, DeJong is a righty. It's worth mentioning that really I'm most excited. We're going to have to watch, the Belts, the Bijos. We're going to really, if our shows, have to watch the lefties. That's probably going to be the Blue Jays' best chance to make some hay tonight is the lefties. I mean, righties barely hitting in the 200. I think it's 202 versus Zack Wheeler. Lefties, though, lefties are hitting 270. That's extremely impressive for lefties against Zack Wheeler. Now, opponents hitting just 212 versus Wheeler's fastball. Righties are going to need to pick out Wheeler's sinker. He's dominant versus righties with his fastball and his new sweeper, but that sinker, that's the pitch that Wheeler's had trouble with against righties. The Vlads, the Merrifields, the Springer's going to have to look to do damage against that pitch tonight. Espinal or Chapman, whoever's in at third. Now, lefties will need to continue. They've been picking on the slider this season. They'll need to continue to pick on the slider. We've seen Wheeler this season as well miss his spots, pretty often with his curveball also, but he's missing his spots a lot to lefties with his slider. That's going to be a major key for the Blue Jays tonight. Now, opposing Zack Wheeler, Yusei Kikuchi. Everydayers will know we've been talking on the Locked On Blue Jay podcast that we're now past the conversation, where the conversation was, boy, hasn't Yusei been so much better in 2023 than 2022? Hasn't he been so much better? We're past that. Now we're into the Yusei Kikuchi has been a downright good pitcher. Never mind the comparisons. His 2023 is standing out on its own at this point. He's tied with teammate Jose Barrios for the 11th best ERA in the American League. I mean, Jose Barrios had the worst ERA last season. He's tied with Yusei, and Yusei was right up there too as being, as we know, right? His 2022 was a nightmare. Both of them this season. Wow. How have the Toronto Blue Jays, who haven't gotten nearly what they needed to get from guys like Springer and Vlad, at the top of the lineup? I mean, Alek Manoah is not even on the big league level. How are they in a playoff position right now? Well, it's because of the 2023s that we've seen authored by Jose Barrios and by Yusei Kikuchi. Yusei Kikuchi, 5 starts out of the All-Star break. The earned runs he's allowed in those 5 starts, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1. Are you absolutely kidding me? He's lowered his ERA in all 5 starts coming out of the All-Star break. Everydayers will know I was still concerned about Yusei, even though he was so much better in that first half, because Everydayers will know we've deep dived this. Yusei in 2021 had a first half of the season that was so good he represented Seattle in the All-Star game. He was an All-Star. Then the second half of the season he went 1-5 with an ERA of 5.98. And in the stretch run, the last couple weeks of the season, remember Seattle in 2021 was right there with the Blue Jays, chasing Boston and New York for that wild card spot coming down the stretch there, and they skipped over. The last couple of weeks, Seattle skipped over Yusei Kikuchi's spots in the rotation in a pennant race in the stretch drive. That's how bad he had become. He had regressed to being every bit as bad as every other half of season we'd always seen from Yusei Kikuchi. In fact, those 5 starts that he had coming out of the All-Star break, well, how about that very first start in 2021 that Yusei Kikuchi had out of the All-Star break? He allowed 7 runs, and that would set the tone for that 1-5 second half of the season, for that 5.98 second half of the season. Well, this time around with the Toronto Blue Jays, the second half of the season, Yusei Kikuchi, has he hit the ground running? He's been so impressive. And part of the so impressive was, you look at a few weeks back, Yusei Kikuchi had allowed 22 home runs. It was the worst in baseball. He was, and that's something that is continued for this season. I'll say that. He's still getting hit hard. I will definitely say that. But he's minimizing the damage. Even those 22 home runs he had allowed, 14 of those were solo home runs. And there was only 1 3-run home run. So not putting those 3-4 runs, those big crooked number run innings on the board, that's been the difference for Yusei Kikuchi so far this season. You look at that back on July 6th, Yusei Kikuchi, it was a 3rd inning home run back on July 6th, a 3rd inning home run to Eloy Jimenez. Blue Jays would end up winning that game anyway, so all good. But that was the last home run Yusei Kikuchi has allowed. So again, weeks ago, coming into July, him and Lance Lynn were trading spots, going back and forth for the most home runs allowed in the league. Since that July 6th, that's the only home run he's allowed. In the 5 starts since the All-Star break, Yusei Kikuchi has not allowed a home run. The improvement with the control, the walks falling off a cliff, like the walks plummeting, which is, of course, is a great thing. And what he's been doing lately with not even allowing home runs. And when he has allowed home runs in 2023, it's been of the solo variety. You can overcome a solo variety. You can overcome a solo home run, I should say. Sorry. I mean, just those turnarounds there alone, absolutely remarkable. This game is at the Rogers Center. Well, Yusei Kikuchi's turnaround at the Rogers Center, totally remarkable. Last season, 5-3 with a 4.58 ERA at home. This season, 5-2 with the 3.44 ERA at home. So he's going to end up with a lot more wins. Hopefully keep at that 2 losses, so less losses than last season, and he's going to end up shaving a run and a half. Let's see if he can continue on the streak. He might shave as many as 2 runs off of that. Probably not, but more like a run and a half, a run and 3/4 off of that home ERA from last season. He's only ever faced on this team, of these current Phillies, he's only ever faced Nick Castellanos and Rodolfo Castro. Those 2 are combined 0 for 7 with 3 strikeouts. The Rodolfo Castro, you might remember, he's sort of like the Paul DeJong for the Phillies. They picked him up at the trade deadline, that middle infielder for that help there. He's only 1 for 16 so far. I mean, really struggling with the bat, right? Paul DeYoung like for the Blue Jays. Now, Rodolfo came over from the Pirates, so the Yusei, one of his good games, and so many good games this season, was against the Pirates earlier this season. And Rodolfo in Castro in that game against Yusei was 0 for 3 with a strikeout. Now, the key will be the success of Kikuchi's. Remember, Kevin Gausman calls it the curve sliderish pitch, that new. I say it's a new pitch. It's like a take on how he used to throw his slider, and it has so much more movement. It's been so much more effective. He's controlling it. He's putting it. He's orchestrating that pitch significantly better than he ever has in the past with the new spin, with the new delivery on it. It's his top strikeout pitch, and it's been the difference maker for Yusei Kikuchi in 2023. Philadelphia Phillies on the season so far, they've been good. They're 21-16 versus lefties. So Kikuchi versus a good Phillies team against lefties. Kikuchi versus Zack Wheeler. This was not going to be an easy one, but what have we seen from 2023 Yusei Kikuchi? More often than not, he's been up to the task. That's a wrap for Tuesday's Locked On Blue Jay podcast episode. I mean, you saw we were packed, right? Had to move Trivia Tuesday to tomorrow, but I always enjoy the trivia, so do tune in tomorrow for that. Reminder that tonight's Blue Jays Phillies tilt is available on Sirius XM. Go Jays, go, and we'll talk tomorrow.